Hi, group. This week I read an article, a 2015 article from the British Art Journal. It's titled John Constable, John Ruskin and the Pre-Raphaelites by Christiana Payne. So the article is about um, basically a discussion that was going on at the time in the 1850s about who could be considered the real founder or progenitor or inspiration to the pre-Raphaelite movement in Britain. John Ruskin was an English writer. Um, had a hero which was J.N.W. Turner. He was almost obsessed about the guy, and he strongly believed that he should be considered the real man behind the movement, and he did that by way of a text or a series of volumes called Modern Painters, first published in 1843, and then there will be at least another couple of volumes in which he explains why he believed the landscapes and the seascapes in J.W. Turner were an inspiration, especially to young painters. And then on the other side, you have other scholars like Charles Leslie, who was an American born and bred in London, though. He actually believed that Constable should be considered such. And he did believe that um, for Ruskin, he almost became personal at some point to try and destroy the reputation of Constable, who had actually died years earlier in 1837, just because he wanted to celebrate his own writing and his favorite painter. But there's plenty of evidence really suggesting in the paper, suggesting that actually Constable was an inspiration in terms of landscape to painters like Brent, Hunt, and other members of the pre-Raphaelites. Um, at some point it says if the pre-Raphaelites were taking Ruskin as the major authority on landscape, one might expect that reading Ruskin would encourage a whole generation of artists to emulate Turner, because that's what Ruskin was doing. He was celebrating Turner. But then there's little evidence, apart from a couple of painters, that any of the young painters did so, especially in terms of colors. Um, you know, Raskin was suggesting that young painters should start with quieter colors and then move on to brighter ones. But then that's not what they were doing. And although they used bright colors, these were predominantly primary colors, including like reds and yellows. Um, and Constable work was the most obvious precedent when it came to open air painting, really. And so the other critique that we mentioned, Leslie, he preferred Constable's early naturalistic works compared to Turner's. And he did express his opinion that he said his art was at its most perfect when he painted the picture of Hampstead Heath in the open air. Uh, and then when Ruskin replied to that, remember he's cheering for Turner. He says something very very harsh, very partial about Constable, arguing he had never seen any work of his in which there were any signs of his being able to draw. Obviously, that's very mean and biased, absolutely, and absolutely not true. When you look at Constable paintings, Constable was a pious man. He had a reverence for the old masters, and whenever he chose subjects that could be considered low, he would do that because that's the kind of there was rural life, there was the countryside, and there was the everyday life that he loved. But that doesn't mean that it should be considered low as subject or even technique that he was using. Uh, Ruskin could not claim that Turner possessed uh, genuinely qualities either. Um, and Ruskin was he says, emphasized instead the sublimity of Turner's work and his noble subjects. So, some of the evidence that the author brings to the table is that um, because Ruskin could not attack Constable's personal life, because it was pretty much, up to scratch, and he couldn't defend Turner's one, then he would just go on and attack Constable's technique and skills, in a very personal way, very direct way. And further evidence really, they talk about Ruskin, um, Ruskin's famous exhortations to young artists, but actually what Ruskin was saying about what modern painters should do, it actually sounds like is echoing the words that Constable used to do in one of his lectures. And when he talks about the colors they should use, the subjects they should use, it's like Constable is talking himself at some point. So there's a chance that Ruskin did check out text and lectures, that were previously given by Constable himself, and maybe consciously or unconsciously repropose them. Um, and there were many reasons why Ruskin was actually despising Constable. He should have actually celebrated him, because then what the author says, one of Ruskin's main point, he wanted young painters to go out there, paint outdoors, and just celebrate nature in a naturalistic way as it was, without adding anything that was like man-made, and just celebrating God's handwork. That's pretty much what Constable was doing. And when it came to landscapes, it was no less than Turner really. Um, he goes on in saying, we said at some point it sort of became personal, as it often happens between art critics in art history. Um, I like the quote where he says, there was a continuing debate going on between Leslie and Ruskin over the relative merits of Constable and Turner. A dispute that became quite personal, with Leslie implying that Ruskin was too young to know any better when he first published Modern Painters, while Ruskin in turn implied that Leslie was senile, which is funny. Um, and then the young pre-Raphaelites, they started in the late 1840s, and Constable did die in 1837, and he, Leslie used to be, who admired Constable, he used to be a professor at the academy during those years in the 1840s, and he obviously he taught Constable as well. And some of the painters that Ruskin was celebrating, they were lectured by Leslie, so they were Leslie's students. So that's further evidence that it's Constable legacy that somehow influenced these young painters um, that Ruskin, was trying to rationalize uh, as actually just a consequence of what Turner had been doing, and just Turner alone. So going back to the main thesis, I say, it's always debatable when it comes to the sort of disputes, but I think there's enough evidence to suggest that Constable is very likely to have influenced this sort of open air, plein air landscape. Looking at the technique, looking at the subjects, the way in paintings at the time, definitely more than Turner's. Ruskin, probably because he was a bit younger at the time, or he admired Turner so much. Maybe at the time Turner was having a hard time. His reputation was declining, also because of his private life. So he was trying to help him out in a way. So that could have been a reason behind this critique. That was the article pretty much. It was an interesting read. Sorry for going about time. Right, thanks for watching. Speak later. Bye bye.